You don't got me back yet? Am I back? We live? Hello? We're back? I think we're back. Bear with me 1 second here. Things being a pain. All right, we're back. We're back alive again. Jeez Louise. Okay, hopefully the internet's done interrupting me here. See what we got, see what we got. All right, we kind of worked our way through the early winter over here into the winter time. So, bear with me. I'm trying to remember where I was at. Yeah, talking about fronts and talking about area, you know, these fish slide up and down the bank here. They can slide easily there so they don't move as far, so you can have a more consistent bite. And you have to change up baits a lot more, you know. If you have an area like this, you know, one day they might be 4 or 5 feet of water. You can hit them with a mid-range crankbait. Well, next time they're suspended out over 20 foot of water here, you might have to catch them with a rig or even a jerk bait. I guess the main thing I'm trying to say is early winter time, you have all these fronts running through. You got to really kind of adapt and overcome because you're going to have a lot of things that are going to try to affect you as far as just the conditions on the lake. And I think that's why a lot of bigger fish are not caught until later in the wintertime. All right, the middle of winter. To me, this is typically it's the more stable time. This year, we've had kind of these fronts moving in and out all winter long. But typically in the middle of the winter, you're going to have water temperatures that are going to kind of fall into the 40s. A lot of times they're in the upper to mid 40s. And what's happened is the lake has already dropped all the way down to winter pool by this point. So you've got the water level itself is stable. You don't have as many fronts moving in, so it's staying stable. There's just kind of a standard amount of current that's running through the entire lake there. And what that does is it makes it where those fish, what they'll do is they'll set up in areas. And a lot of times if you can find them in an area, when everything's stable, they'll stay in that area. Whether you find them shallow, whether you find them a little deeper, whether you find them mid-range, they typically will kind of hang out in that same area. The shad will do the same thing. They'll hang out in certain areas. And an area that you might find them would be, again, in a creek. You see right here we've got a main, it's like a secondary point in a creek around a creek channel. This is an area where bait will stack up. Again, when we're talking about inside turns and openings where a creek runs out and you get an opening, those are areas where fish will kind of stack up. They'll stack up in the inside turns on these secondary creek channels and even around some of these points themselves. You'll find areas that'll have fish on them and they will remain in that area as long as the conditions allow them to remain there. One thing about the middle of winter is that the fish are in very tightly packed schools. You might have a lot of fish, but they'll be in a really small area a lot of times. You know, you might have 100 fish in a school, but they're in an area that's the size of your boat or even smaller. And so it's one of those things where using your electronics can be really good to find them. But if you get a bite, you got to make that exact same cast. You can't miss it by 10 feet, you can't miss it by 12 feet because you might miss a mega school like that. Another thing that I find is that the really big fish over 7, 8, 10 pounds, they tend to be solitary. I don't really find them schooled up with other fish. They're not schooled up by size as much that time of the year unless they're smaller. It seems like the 3 to 5, 6 pounders will be kind of piled in together, and then smaller fish will be piled in together, but really big fish tend to be loners from what I've seen. As far as finding fish, again, we kind of talked the last thirds of the creeks here, creek mouths, the deeper backwater areas, the cuts that come through there, secondary channels. These are all great areas to find those fish. All right, let's see here. Now moving on into the late winter. Now to me, late winter we start getting January, February, and what happens is the water temps are still very cold, and oftentimes they even fall. What I find in February a lot is, again, what we just talked about, changes in seasons equal fronts coming through. So we get some of our nastiest weather February and March, and what happens is these fish, they're affected by that. You get these fronts that roll in, and a lot of times I find water temperatures that get into the low 40s, even high 30s during that time period, but something magical happens. And what happens is the days begin to get longer, and as they get longer, you get a couple moon phases in, and what happens is those fish, they want to move shallow. Instinctively, they want to get up to the bank. They want to go ahead and start staging to spawn. And when they do that, you can target those fish. And what happens too, I've noticed, we talked about a second ago that the bigger fish don't tend to be together, or they're solitary in the middle of the winter. Well, when you start to get into this early pre-spawn late winter period, they tend to group up more. So if you pull up to a point and you catch a 7-pounder, well, you better make that same cast again, because a lot of times you'll catch another one, or maybe even one bigger there. And there'll be small groups, 6, 7 fish, but they're really big fish. And so you can target them that way. Unfortunately, they're always on the move then. You got a lot of fish that they're trying to migrate. They're trying to push back into the creeks. So we're talking about fish in creeks. They'll be pushing their way into the first third, on into the second third of creeks, and hitting these secondary points along the way. And it really varies on the lake. Right now, I'm seeing the same thing. You'll go push way up into a backwater onto a flat, and you'll catch, a bunch of fish there. Then you can pull out into the creek channel in 20-something foot of water and still catch big fish there. So the fish are spread out. So you just got to kind of fish your strengths, get on the right kind of fish, and try to stick with them as they work their way back into these areas. I like to fish a lot of 45-degree banks and a lot of shallow flats during that time, just to try to connect with those fish. Let's see here. All right, jumping back over here. I'm going to start answering a couple questions here. Let me pop back up to the top here. I apologize to everyone who answered questions on that last part. I've lost now some of the things that people were saying or comments. So if you had a question that you commented before I lost you on this stream, go ahead and comment it again, because now I've lost the ability to actually see that. Let's see here. What's the water temp on Chick right now? Melvin, let's see here. Water temp on Chick right now, the last time I was out was in the 40s. You're looking 45. Found some areas that were 46, but most of it was around that 45, 44 degree mark. Let's see here. Looking for questions here. Do I fish Chester Frost much? Ryan Waters asked that question. I do fish Chester Frost quite a bit. A lot of times I'll fish during a weekday because it does get crowded on the weekend. Scott says I gotta show you some good winter holes. Well, I've shown you a couple actually right here, just kind of inadvertently. So if you were looking at me kind of pointing out, hint, hint, some areas like this and secondary channels, hint, hint, in those areas, those are some really good spots to look at. I'll throw you a bone here and tell you that, some of these channel swing banks over here around Sequoia are really good. And the intake, the warm water intake up there can be very good. Let's see here. What's another good winter spot that I can give away to folks here? I'm losing here. There we go. These little cuts right here. You get outside of Main Creek and you get a cut. That's what I call a secondary channel, where those open up right there, where they first open up out of the Main Creek channel, can be a really good spot to look. But it's hit and miss. If the bait's there, go ahead and fish it. If the bait's not there, you probably need to move on. All right, Melvin also wants me to talk about different rattle baits, sounds, vibrations, other than red-eye shad. All right, so talking about some of the lipless cranks I use, I don't know if I want to go into too much detail about this because I use a whole lot of different ones in different circumstances. So, if you're just doing like a burn and stop, or you're just trying to cover a whole lot of water, it can be really hard to beat something that doesn't have much of a good wobble on the fall. Let's say a straight Bill Lewis rattle trap can be a good option for that. A Booyah one knocker, it's one of the old Excaliburs. They tend to be a bait that's really good when you're fishing kind of a burn and stop or just a straight retrieve, something kind of like that. A lot of baits that you want to use for more of a yo-yo, you want something that's going to come up, lift up, and then fall and wobble on the fall there. So a bait that does that for me is going to be, a Damiki trimmer for shallow water, an LV 500 for deeper water. The 6 Sense Quake will have a shimmy to it, and of course the Red Eye Shad has a good shimmy to it as well. Baits like the LV 500 and the Bill Lewis Rattle Trap are going to be much louder, whereas baits like the Booyah and the Red Eye Shad are a little bit quieter, and then even quieter than that would be something like the Damiki. The Evergreen lipless baits are somewhere in between there. As you can probably tell, I fish a whole lot of different ones. So there's tons of brands out there. I've spent, probably thousands of dollars at this point on lipless baits. So you don't have to do all that, though. Hopefully that answered your question, Melvin. Let's see here. Eric asked, for this time of year, what are you looking for the most to find fish? In the wintertime, what I'm looking for the most to find fish is I'm going to be looking for good grass. If I can find an area in the wintertime that has some grass that survived the fall, that survived all these fronts, and is still looking good, it's usually a little bit deeper water. If I can find that, a lot of times it'll hold fish. The other thing I'm looking for is the bait. So in different parts of the creek, you're going to find bait. In different parts of the main lake, you'll find these little pods of bait. Now the fish, sometimes they'll be right underneath that bait out there suspended on it, but you got to think, the colder the water is, these fish are lethargic. So what they're going to do is they're going to set up on the structure that's immediately adjacent to where those shad are in most cases, because what's going to happen, the current is going to push those shad and bait fish into there. Another thing, I don't know if I want to say this or not, it's super secret, but I'll go ahead and tell you. If you find a bunch of small crappie or bluegill, that can be an amazing place if you're trying to catch a really giant bass. If you want to catch a true giant, if you get around schools of crappie and bluegill, that can be the way to do it. Another thing is if you find, a shallow area that's got gizzard shad on it, that can be another area you can catch those mondos in there. Let's see here. How do I compete with all the bait? Andrew asked. And yeah, when you get in an area that is so overcrowded with bait, a lot of times I'll leave that area. This is a good, and I'll probably do a completely separate video on this at some point, but you have to read the bait. So if you get an area and there's giant schools of bait, I'm talking wads of bait that are 3-4 times the size of your boat, and you can't even beam your sonar through that, to me, that tells me that there's nothing in there chasing that bait around. I want to find an area that's got smaller schools of bait that look like they're broken up. An area that's got, crappie in there chasing them, white bass in there chasing them. I know that there's predatory fish around. I know that those bait fish are not comfortable. They're getting pushed apart. And that tells me that's an area I need to look for. And again, I'll look adjacent to those fish into that cover and find them. That's another way you can compete with bait, is to get in an area around bait, but you look to that cover adjacent to it where those fish are setting up. So you're like, here's the bait here. Where's the ambush point? That's probably the best way to say that. Where's the ambush point where those fish are going to be? Let's see here. David Miller said, what would be the best advice for those that only fish once or twice a year? David, I would say definitely get out there and fish more, dude. One thing you can do is get on here and watch my videos, but I would recommend trying to befriend some local guys or anybody that fishes more often. That way you can get somewhat of up-to-date knowledge. It can be kind of hard to just go onto the water without following these fish around and really get on them. You got an area in March I should try. This is my first time here. an area in March, really any of these areas that I just showed you, you start pushing up in March. Remember we talked about these fish pulling back into creeks and into backwaters. So in March, what I would do, depending on when you get here, is start looking at the last third of creeks and looking shallower on the flats on the main lake. And that should give you a good starting point to find those fish. Do I have a guide service, Ronnie asked me. No, I do not. I'm not licensed to be a guide. If you're wanting a guided trip, I highly recommend, if you're wanting to fish the south end of the lake, Chris Height is an excellent guide in the south end of the lake. He can really teach you a lot about your electronics, a lot about how to find these fish down there, especially in the highly pressured south end. If you're wanting to fish, if you want to learn the river side of the lake, you know, the north end where there's more current, the lake is much narrower, I would recommend contacting Billy Wheat, and he can teach you a lot about that. Absolute hammer up in that area. He's been catching some big fish. Let's see here. Chris Brown fished the Chick the first time this past Sunday and zeroed, traveled 4 hours. Yep, I mean, that's one thing. I tell you, Chris, I actually fished Sunday, and we caught quite a few fish. And honestly, I fished for almost 4 hours, and I didn't get a single bite until the last hour. That's one thing I can tell you. If you're wintertime fishing, you really got to get out there, cover water, try a lot of different things, and a lot of times you'll be rewarded, but you really have to grind it out. I found those fish ultra shallow on a flat. I'm talking trolling motor in the mud, casting into 12, 16 inches of water. It was really bizarre, 44-degree water temperatures, and they were up there in little packs, like little wolf packs on these flats and stuff. Let's see here. Any more questions, guys? Let's put some questions down there. I don't have a whole lot more to talk about. So if you guys have some questions, I'd love to try to answer anything specific that you might have. All right. We'll zoom in here. See if I can get Google Earth to load here. Let's see here. Randy Hooker says, where am I looking for grass this time of year? That's a good question. A lot of times at the mouths of major creeks is a good place to look out. Anytime you've got a drain, a deeper drain or secondary channel that's running out to the main channel, you're looking for an area that is protected from the current. More often than not, that's going to be the spot you're going to find grass this time of year. Again, you're looking at a little bit deeper depth ranges. I'm thinking 12 to 14 foot. You got somebody looking to hook up to fish with me one day. It's always possible. I try to fish with as many people as I possibly can. I actually met a couple kids at a booth over there at the East Tennessee Fishing Show, and that's who I fished with on Sunday. Had a great time with those guys, and hopefully they're going to return the favor for me to go do some trout fishing soon. Thomas asked, what are my thoughts on the weekend fishing pressure? My thoughts are I'm just not a big fan of that at all. I try to avoid fishing on the weekend if possible, just so I'm not getting run over by people. Last few times I've gone out, I'll get on a spot, I hook one 5 or 6 pounder, and everybody on the lake wants to come over there and drop a trolling motor right on me. Which, guys, if you see me out on the water one day and you want to come over and fish with me or anything like that, or fish next to me, I don't really care. It doesn't bother me. What bothers me is when somebody doesn't say a word and drops a trolling motor 15 foot away from me and starts fishing. Let's see here. Two best colors for a trap. Fishing like a girl. She always has the best questions. Two best colors for a trap. That is an extremely hard one for me. As far as, I'm just going to give you the two colors that I have had most success on just catching the biggest fish. One would be a blueback chrome or like a sexy shad chrome. Well, daggum stream's having trouble again. Got me. A chrome, or I think probably my other one. I know a lot of guys would say red. To me, I haven't had as much success with red, but a chartreuse blueback or a chartreuse blackback, I've caught tons of big fish on. Tony asks, when do I pick a lipless over a regular crank or a small swim bait? And that's a good question, Tony. A lipless crank, to me, I choose it a lot of times over a regular crankbait like a mid-range crankbait or a square bill just because of the versatility of that bait. Again, it's something I can cover a lot of water on the lake, and if I run into an area where I need to be catching fish in, say, 4 foot of water, I can burn and stop that thing. If I get around grass, I can lift a lipless bait, lift it out of the grass and clear the bait, whereas a lot of other cranks are wanting to dig down into that grass and make things a lot more difficult for me. Another thing is a lipless crank, I don't feel like picks up as many leaves and things like that off the bottom. The one thing that the downside is if I'm fishing wood or heavy wooded cover or some other cover that's really snaggy like stumps or anything like that, that's when I'll switch over to that square bill or that mid-range crank. As far as determining whether to throw that small swim bait, honestly, a lot of times what I do is I'll have that small swim bait on deck, and if I see those fish out there, they won't hit a lipless. If I see them on my graph, I'll fire that small swim bait out there. Another thing that I'll do is if I'm catching them one after another on a lipless, they go off of that lipless, that's when I'll fire that little swim bait in there and get usually a few more bites out of a small school of fish. Let's see here. How far is it from Saudi Creek to Richland Creek? Wendy Duncan asked that question. One of you guys that has a bigger boat that runs faster than me could probably answer that better. Why don't y'all answer that for Wendy down in the comments? But this one's between Saudi Creek and Richland Creek. I'm not exactly sure. Pretty fair distance. Do I ever fish Nickajack? And if so, how was it? Calvin asked about that. Nickajack is amazing. I think it's going to be the next Chickamauga. It is absolutely an awesome lake. I've caught a lot of big fish in there. If you look at my buddy Alex Rudd Fishing's channel, he posted a video. I haven't yet to post my footage on there, but a few weeks ago we got out there and running some small body cranks on Nickajack in the tail race, which is actually the flood waters coming in from Chickamauga Dam, and caught about a 6.5 to 7 pounder on one of those wiggle warts. It's a great place to catch really big smallmouth and really big largemouth. I like the idea of catching some big stripers on there, buddy. Let's see here. Andrew said he struggled on the chick the last 4 days, even with a guide. At what point do you change baits or structure? Andrew, I'll tell you, a lot of times you get out here and we get a front that'll roll in and things will turn into a grind. So a lot of times what I'll do when I have a big cold front roll through like this, you get the high pressure after the cold front. To me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out and fish for a bite. I'm going to go out and throw a big bait. I'm going to go out and fish main lake key structure or very key structure in a creek where I think a giant fish might be, and I'm going to fish for that 1 10-pound bite, because a lot of times when you get a cold front roll in, you're just not going to get the amount of feedback from the fish, the amount of bites. So to me, it's best to go out there and really try to catch a giant. Let's see here. What are the 4 baits I like to fish most in early March? I like to fish a lipless bait. I like to fish a rig. Let's see here. I love to fish a jerk bait if the water will clean up for me in March. It can be really difficult to find clean water in March if you get a lot of fronts that roll through. And I like to fish a jig. That would probably be my top 4. And when I say a jig, I like to fish a finesse jig. If you guys go get on MGC Custom Tackle, he's got a finesse jig on there. I think it's the Sniper, but they have a finesse version of it. That bait has an excellent hook in there, and you can go with a smaller trailer. like a double tail grub or a zoom speed crawl can be a great wintertime trailer. Or just a single grub. A lot of times I put a single smoke grub on it. What about Watts Bar? Melvin asked. Watts Bar is a lake that I don't really get on as much, and to me it fishes a lot different than the Chickamauga. In fact, we're gonna pop over here. We're gonna get on the mapping. We're gonna go up here. We can get it to load. Let that thing load for a second. All right, Watts Bar Dam. You zoom out here and you look at this thing. It is a lot different than Chickamauga. It's a much deeper lake. It's a lake that has major creeks. As far as the river and actual what I would call main lake, it's much smaller than some of these enormous feeder creeks that you get into Watts Bar. The success that I've had on Watts Bar has been going up into these major feeder creeks. And almost what I would consider these creeks to be is almost like individual lakes. It's almost, the guys fishing Kissimmee chain of lakes down there. I mean, they have all these individual lakes that are kind of considered one chain of lakes there, but that's the way I kind of consider Watts Bar. It's almost like you've got your own individual lakes. These creeks are so large. And you can get in here, and from what I've seen is I can pattern fish completely differently from one creek to the next. You might go way south into some of these creeks. You can run in there and fish are biting a certain way. But if it's not happening or things are changed up, conditions changed up on you, you can go and fish one of these other ones, and it can be completely different. It's really a cool fishery, and it's got some big smallmouth, a lot of huge largemouth in there. If you really want to see some more in-depth fishing on Watts Bar, I would definitely highly recommend looking at Alex Rudd's channel because he does a lot up there. Let's see here. Do I have any tips? Ella says, do I have any tips on fishing islands? That's an interesting thought. I treat an island a lot of times. Let's see here. We'll look at Hiwassee Island here. I treat an island a lot of times like I would a big hump. So what you're going to find on a hump most of the times is on the up current side of that hump, what you're going to find is active fish that are facing into the current there, and you can catch those fish like that. Another thing I do when I'm looking at a hump is I go down the side of it and I'm looking for inside turns or changes in that structure where those fish can pull out of the current and slide out of it easily and then pull out and grab a meal. On a river system, what happens is these shad are constantly getting washed down, and the fish, they'll find ambush points along these humps, along the edges here on inside turns, such as an area like this, where they can ambush those shad. One of the places that you'll find probably the biggest school, especially during the cold water months, is on the south end or on the down current side of a hump. And once you get out there, again, inside turns, places where those fish can duck out of the current and they can quickly get onto shad. And a lot of times shad will just pile up and sit in these eddy lines. They can draft the current and stay out of there. Let's see here. Randy says Watts Bar should start fishing better in a few years. I agree. I think it's going to end up being one of the better options there. Let's see here. Eric T. and Bassin. That's another awesome guy. Go ahead and check his channel out, guys. He does a lot of good fishing on Watts Bar Lake as well. Let's see here. Pulling lips. So they're biting shallow at Chickamauga. Yes, right now they were very shallow on Sunday. However, since Sunday, again, we're talking about late winter, early pre-spawn. You get these fronts that roll in. So what happened is we got an influx of rain, and they started to drop the water. So the water's been falling, and the water temperature's been falling. So those fish that I caught ultra shallow, they were way up in a flat and in a backwater. What happens is most likely those fish have moved hundreds of yards by now and are in a little bit deeper water. Now, whether they're in 6 foot of water or 12 foot of water, I would have to go out and determine that. But that's one thing that the area I caught those fish, I wouldn't call it a consistent spot where I could go back and catch them again. Let's see here. Piercy says, where is the deepest place I've ever caught bass? That's an awesome question because it just happened the other day. I got out with my good buddy Will Van Eaton. If you look, I've got a video that I posted on Norris Lake a couple weeks ago. We went out there and we were fishing ultralight 4-pound test line in deeper than 40 foot of water, somewhere around 40, 45, maybe 50 foot of water is the deepest I've ever caught a bass now. Most of the time, I'll tell you, I'm a shallow water fisherman. If I can catch fish in inches of water, I'm going to work my hardest to go ahead and do that. Rich says, is there a carp problem on Chickamauga? No, there's no Asian carp problem. There are a lot of common carp on the lake, and you do snag them a lot if you are throwing a lipless. Any more questions on there? I'm probably going to shut the stream down here in about 10 minutes or so. I'm going to be doing some detailed breakdowns, guys, on a lot of different baits that I use in the wintertime. Going to be talking and probably doing the jig video coming up really soon. Going to be doing a jerkbait video, and I'm going to be doing map studies on those. I apologize this time I had to do the map study for the lipless video on this live stream. In the future, I'm going to do my best to include those in the videos. It's just I'm trying to keep those things less than 25 minutes long, you know. Let's see here. Piercy says, have I ever tried to catch fish on a bed with a crappie jig? I don't bed fish a lot, and I've never tried a crappie jig on a bed. I will tell you, if you want to catch a bedding fish, it's really hard to beat a jerkbait. If you can suspend that jerkbait right in front of their face, a lot of times they'll eat it. Blake says, never fished Nickajack, but recommend a boat ramp for you. I recommend the Lupton City ramp. It's right there. There's a tennis club. It's the easiest way to look it up on Google Earth. Let me see if I can pull down here for you. Let's see here. Lupton City ramp. Yeah. Right here. I don't know what that's called, but that's a big tennis court area. It's right below this bridge right here, and it's a safe ramp that you can put in at. The only thing I will tell you, if they're running as much current as they're running right now, most of that's going to be flooded out. So you really need two people. You need a guy to back the boat into the water, and then you're actually going to have to run the boat back up on the ramp to pick up your buddy and then go fishing, because the dock, you won't be able to get on the dock. It'll be flooded. Oh, Rich says, do I have any of the 110 plus 2s yet? I don't have them yet, but I'm going to get me a couple of them and try them out. Honestly, a lot of the jerkbait fishing that I do on Chickamauga is not really, doesn't really play for that deep, but I know some deep lakes around here that are clear water. I think I'd catch some. Piercy says, what's my PB? My PB right now is 10.42 pounds. I've caught a total of 3 double digits on Chickamauga, and I don't even know how many fish over 9 pounds now, probably close to 10 fish over 9 pounds. I caught 4 fish over 9 pounds in 2018. I couldn't quite get a 10-pounder. Where on the lake would I start at the end of March? It depends on what's going on. If you get a big front that rolls through and everything gets dirtied up, then I would say fish kind of north around Hiawassee and fish the west side of the lake. If everything's pretty stable, you go down south. The further you are south below Sequoia, you get warm water intake. You get a few degrees warmer usually, and pretty stable fishing down there. So maybe Chester Frost, Harrison Bay area. Best thing you could do is probably message me around when you're coming, and I can kind of give me up to date what's going on. Randy just had a ramp recommendation for the lower end. The ramp recommendation I gave you is if you want to fish the tailwaters up there. Will says he's got a Rattle Trap tournament at Gunnersville next weekend. And he says Rattle Trap, so I'm assuming you're probably using the actual Bill Lewis rattle traps, what I would recommend, Guntersville is known for having a lot of grass. What I would try to do is find some relatively shallow grass over there. I would get a few of the floating Bill Lewis rattle traps, put bigger hooks on them, put a 2X Gamakatsu, put a 2X Mustad Triple Grip on there, and what that'll do is it'll cause that bait to actually suspend. You can get that thing to fish down 3-4 feet or so and suspend it over top of that grass. Those fish have probably not seen that, and they will destroy it. Another thing you can do is, again, just fish the rattle trap with a burn stop, get around the grass, try to rip free of the grass. I still have luck fishing a standard rattle trap. It doesn't wobble as much on the fall, but it still can get those fish to react to it. I've had good success with that. If you find the fish on hard bottom, on Chickamauga a lot, they get on these hard bottom on shell beds and stuff, so you can throw that rattle trap and just drag it across the shell beds and shake it in place and just make it loud and obnoxious. But I guess what I'm trying to say is be different out there. Do something a little bit different than other guys are doing. So no stained water jerkbait fishing for me, Melvin asked me. I don't fish stained water with a jerkbait as often. I feel like most of the time if the water is more stained, and when I talk about, I fish a jerkbait in 1.5 foot, 2 foot visibility or more. If it's more stained than that, I feel like I should pull out something else. And if it's sub 3 foot of water, between 3 and 1.5 foot visibility of water, I go with a brighter color, solid colored jerkbait like a table rock shad or something like that. What's my top spot for catching late winter bass? Probably if I had to pick just an area that I would catch numbers of late winter bass, would be on Main Lake Flats is usually where I catch a lot of numbers of fish. Any suggestions for nickajack? What I suggest right now, if they're running this much current on there, is I would go up and get in the tail race and drift down through there and crank and throw rigs for big smallmouth and big largemouth in there. You can, any of the little cuts and inside turns there that have a current break on them, you can go in there and flip a jig usually and catch good largemouth as well. Chris asked if I've thrown the Berkeley War Pig, and I have not thrown that lipless. If you have, Chris, if you know if that's a good bait, let me know if it's one I should pick up. Randy says a 1 ounce rattle trap is excellent on Guntersville this time of year. I have heard that as well. But again, I would probably get out there and throw something like that, but I'd also want to try to be different. Let's see here. Picked up Demiki. Yeah, that Demiki lipless is something else. I caught a lot of good fish on it last year. Oh, I got a spring question here. Greg Blake says top water in April or May, favorite baits. Let's see here. I'm thinking April and May. I really like to throw a buzz bait with like a toad as the trailer on there. So in other words, I pull off the skirt. I love throwing a buzz bait in May. What else do I like to throw? I like to throw a popper in April and May because I can get around those bass that are on bed and stuff. A popping frog can be really good around bedding bass. I can skip that thing way up under cover and get over there and catch some of those bass that are on bed or fry guarding. Let's see here. Another one is any kind of big bluegill style. Anything that looks like a big bluegill, like a frog. I've got some walking, look like big bluegill baits. Those can be really good. Topwater baits in April and May. Those are probably my favorites. Thank you, Chris. That's awesome. That's kind of cool. I'm curious to try that now. I'm going to have to order a couple of them. He says that they have a flat nose to them, and so they deflect off a cover relatively well, kind of like a square bill. I've got a couple stump flats that I fish around here. I love fishing a lipless, but a lot of times I have to switch to a square bill just to fish those, so I might be able to try that up. Let's see here. Piercy says, do I recommend blade baits? Absolutely. When the water gets around 40 degrees, 38 degrees, it can be an excellent thing to pull out a blade bait. Another thing I'll do is fish a lipless as well. Sometimes they don't like the rattles, though, so you can fish a silent lipless in deep water and get a little bit more realistic than a blade bait. Dan says, can't seem to figure out a rig. What am I doing wrong? Well, I'd be curious to know. You might want to message me what kind of rig setup you have right now. I did a whole video on that. If you'll go back through and look at it, there's a lot of things that I do specifically with a rig that I think are different than what other people do, and I think that's why I'm able to get bites on it. Other than that, to me, a rig, you can fish it in just about any situation, whether it's really deep water or really up shallow. I've got some rigs that I've got rigged up for fishing ultra shallow flats, as well as this late winter, early pre-spawn bite starts to happen. But the main thing is you can use it as a search tool and find the fish. If you're not catching fish on a rig, I would say most likely what's going on is maybe you have an issue with the weight of the rig. You know, it's coming through the water not horizontally, but more of a vertical presentation. It looks funny to the fish. It could also be that your swim baits are not kicking properly. You might want to reevaluate what kind of swim baits you're throwing on there to make sure they're working for the water temperature. All right, guys, I think that is about it. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. As always, hope you liked it. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you have not. And I guess I will be catching you guys on the next one. Make sure you share my videos up. I'm trying to grow this channel. What I'm really trying to do is get to 5,000 subscribers by the Classic. So that's kind of like my big goal right now. So if you can help me get there, I would be much, much appreciative of that. Any more questions or anything like that, feel free to message them, or this is going to go live on my channel after this point. So you can put them on there as well. I think that'll be it. Catch you on the next one.